What if Hollywood's biggest secret is not how stars are made, but how quickly they are erased? Some names on this list walked away rich. Others were pushed aside when studios found a newer face. A few escaped fame before fame consumed them, and one vanished so completely that the mystery survives. These are not failures. They are stories about power, image, fear, freedom, and an industry that can applaud you tonight, then act as if you never existed tomorrow. Before we open Hollywood's Forgotten Files, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Number 45. Dorothy Janis. Long before Hollywood learned to manufacture mystery, this quiet Texas-born beauty was already becoming one. Dorothy Janis entered pictures during the final years of silent cinema, and quickly attracted attention opposite Ramon Novarro in The Pagan. Her expressive face seemed made for stories that needed emotion without dialogue, and studios appeared ready to turn her into a dependable romantic star. Then, almost immediately, the promise ended. After only a handful of films, Janis left the screen in 1930 and married bandleader Wayne King. There was no public battle, no humiliating downfall, and no desperate comeback campaign. She simply chose marriage and private life over the machinery of fame. That decision made her increasingly invisible as Hollywood moved into the sound era and promoted a new generation. For decades, many viewers assumed she had been another silent star discarded by changing technology. In reality, she had made the rarest move of all. She walked away before the industry could decide her future for her. Number 44. Leila Hyams. Few departures were quieter than the exit of the woman once advertised as one of Hollywood's most beautiful faces. Leila Hyams began as a model and entered films during the difficult transition from silent pictures to sound. Unlike many performers, she adapted easily, appearing in comedies, dramas, and horror classics including Freaks and Island of Lost Souls. Her combination of warmth and intelligence made her seem capable of lasting for years. Yet in 1936, after roughly 50 screen appearances, she retired. She was still young, still recognizable, and not publicly disgraced. Hollywood had not formally rejected her. She rejected the endless cycle of auditions, publicity, and studio control. Hyams remained married to agent Phil Berg and guarded her privacy so carefully that later audiences often assumed something terrible had happened. Nothing sensational had. She had simply discovered that a life outside the spotlight could be more satisfying than another close-up, leaving behind a compact career that grew more admired after she vanished. Enjoying the countdown? Subscribe now, because the most surprising disappearances are still ahead. And tell us which forgotten star deserves a complete story of their own. Number 43. Virginia Cherrill. Imagine becoming immortal in one of cinema's most famous endings, then refusing to spend the rest of your life chasing that moment. Virginia Cherrill was not an experienced actress when Charlie Chaplin selected her to play the blind flower girl in City Lights. Their working relationship was difficult, but the result became legendary. Her final recognition of the tramp remains one of silent film's most moving scenes. That single role should have secured a long career. Instead, Cherrill made a limited number of additional pictures, married several times, traveled widely, and withdrew from acting in 1937. Her marriage to Cary Grant briefly kept her in headlines, but she never returned to regular screen work. Hollywood remembered the flower girl while largely forgetting the woman who played her. Cherrill seemed comfortable with that distance. Rather than compete with her own perfect scene, she allowed it to stand untouched. She disappeared not because the audience rejected her, but because one unforgettable performance had already said almost everything. Number 42. Billy Dove. At the height of silent cinema, audiences knew her as the American Beauty, a glamorous star whose photographs appeared everywhere. Billy Dove had danced in the Ziegfeld Follies before films turned her into a romantic idol. She worked opposite leading men, headlined expensive productions, and became famous enough for aviator Howard Hughes to pursue her. Then sound arrived, studio politics changed, and Dove made a decision that surprised almost everyone. In 1932, while still in her 20s, she left motion pictures. Although she occasionally appeared at public events and later discussed her career, she resisted attempts to pull her back into acting. Rumors claimed that sound had ruined her, or that a scandal had forced her out, but her departure was more controlled than that. Financially secure and tired of the business, she chose family and privacy. The industry that had sold her as an ideal beauty quickly moved on. Dove lived for decades afterward, proving that disappearing from Hollywood did not always mean losing. Sometimes, it meant escaping. Number 41. Evelyn Ankers. Behind the screams and shadows of Universal's horror cycle stood a performer who often brought calm intelligence to impossible situations. Evelyn Ankers became known as the studio's Queen of the Screamers, appearing in The Wolfman, The Ghost of Frankenstein, and Son of Dracula. The label made her memorable, but it also trapped her inside a narrow image. By the late 1940s, the horror boom had weakened, and Ankers was balancing work with marriage to actor Richard Denning and raising a family. Around 1950, she stepped away from regular filmmaking. One later appearance came in No Greater Love, a project connected to her husband, but the old career never resumed. Instead of fighting for smaller roles as Hollywood changed, she devoted herself to private life. Fans who rediscovered the Universal monsters wondered why their elegant leading lady had disappeared. The answer was less frightening than her films. She had outgrown a studio identity that offered little room to become anything else. Number 40. Anne Dvorak. A fierce screen presence made this actress look impossible to control, and that impression was not entirely wrong. Anne Dvorak became a sensation in Scarface, and proved equally compelling in Three on a Match, but her career was damaged by a bitter dispute with Warner Brothers over pay and working conditions. She challenged a studio system that expected young stars to accept long hours, weak assignments, and salaries far below the profits their films generated. The rebellion cost her momentum. Dvorak continued acting through the 1930s and 1940s, yet the major breakthrough never returned. In 1952, she retired from films. Several years later, she moved to Hawaii, far from Hollywood publicity. Her disappearance was not sudden. It was the slow result of an actress learning how severely the industry punished resistance. Today, her early performances feel modern and emotionally dangerous. They also raise an uncomfortable question. How much larger might her legacy have been if demanding fair treatment had not been treated like betrayal? Number 39. Jane Bryan. Everything about her early rise suggested that Warner Brothers had found its next important leading lady. Jane Bryan was young, poised, and persuasive in dramas such as Marked Woman and Each Dawn I Die. She held the screen opposite powerful personalities, and the studio promoted her as a major prospect. Then, at only 22, she married businessman Justin Dart and retired in 1940. The decision stunned people who believed no ambitious actress would abandon a growing career. Bryan did not spend the following years trying to recover attention. She raised a family, supported cultural and charitable causes, and became an influential arts patron. Because her filmography stopped just as her status was rising, modern viewers encounter her like an unfinished sentence. There was no final failure to explain the disappearance. A different life simply became more important. Hollywood lost a potential star because Bryan understood something studios rarely admitted. Success on their terms was not the only kind available. Number 38. Jacqueline White. One tense train journey gave her a permanent place in film noir history, yet she had nearly finished acting before audiences recognized its greatness. Jacqueline White worked under contract at MGM and RKO, appearing in Crossfire before taking the leading role in The Narrow Margin. Soon after marrying Bruce Anderson, she left regular screen work and moved away from the industry. The Narrow Margin was released in 1952, by which time White was already building a private family life. She later lived in Wyoming, where her husband worked in the oil business, and raised their children instead of chasing assignments. Decades passed before noir festivals renewed interest in her performances. White occasionally appeared for interviews and screenings, but she did not attempt a comeback. Her story feels like the ending of one of her thrillers. The train reaches its destination, the danger passes, and the heroine walks into another life. Hollywood continued without her, while the film she left behind quietly became a classic. Number 37. Johnny Sheffield. For millions of children, he was Boy, the fearless adopted son swinging through the jungle beside Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan. Johnny Sheffield entered the series as a child and grew up in public through 8 adventures. When that chapter ended, he became the star of another jungle franchise, Bomba, the Jungle Boy. Yet adulthood created a problem Hollywood often refused to solve for former child performers. Audiences knew the character better than the actor. After the Bomba films ended, Sheffield retired from acting at only 24. He attended UCLA, entered business, and worked in fields including real estate rather than living on nostalgia. Unlike many former young stars, he avoided a prolonged public struggle and rarely sought attention. His disappearance looked mysterious, only because his childhood image remained so vivid. The industry had frozen him as an adventurous boy, but Sheffield refused to remain trapped there. He walked away, built an ordinary professional life, and allowed Tarzan's jungle to exist where it belonged, on the screen. Number 36. Freddie Bartholomew. Child stardom brought him elegant costumes, international fame, and an adult-sized burden before he was old enough to understand any of it. Freddie Bartholomew became one of the 1930s most celebrated young actors through David Copperfield, Little Lord Fauntleroy, and Captains Courageous. Behind the polished performances, however, family disputes over his earnings and years of legal conflict complicated the fantasy. Military service interrupted his career, and the post-war industry had little interest in preserving his childhood image. By 1951, Bartholomew had left acting. What followed was not a collapse, but a remarkable reinvention. He moved into advertising and television production, eventually becoming a successful executive whose colleagues sometimes had no idea that he had once been a global movie star. Hollywood had trained him to perform childhood for the public. Adulthood began when he stopped. His disappearance reveals one of the industry's oldest habits: celebrating children intensely, then acting surprised when they choose an identity that does not require applause. Number 35. John Boles. The voice was rich. The profile was handsome. And for a time, John Boles appeared to possess everything the new sound era required. He sang in early musicals, played Victor Moritz in Frankenstein, and later became the patient husband in Stella Dallas. Yet Hollywood's appetite for romantic leading men changed quickly. By the 1940s, Boles was receiving fewer substantial roles, and he seemed unwilling to spend his later years begging for scraps from an industry that had once placed his name above the title. After returning briefly to Broadway, he retired from acting and moved into business, including interests connected with oil in his native Texas. The disappearance confused viewers because there had been no dramatic scandal and no obvious inability to perform. Boles had simply reached the point where remaining visible required accepting work that no longer matched his ambitions. His departure also exposed how efficiently the studio system replaced mature leading men. Once the singing hero and polished gentleman fell out of fashion, the publicity machine that had praised him became silent. He lived for years beyond his final screen appearance, largely outside the movie world. The actor vanished, but his face remained embedded in several classics that continued finding new audiences long after Hollywood stopped calling. Watching him now, viewers still hear confidence that made early talking pictures seem polished, modern, and emotionally secure. Number 34. Richard Barthelmess. Before Rudolph Valentino became the symbol of silent romance, another quiet, sensitive leading man was already creating a different kind of screen hero. Richard Barthelmess earned major acclaim in Broken Blossoms and Way Down East, where his restrained acting helped prove that film performance could be intimate rather than theatrical. He remained important through the 1920s, and even helped establish the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Sound did not instantly destroy him, but changing tastes gradually reduced his status. Supporting parts replaced starring vehicles, and by the early 1940s he felt the excitement had gone out of the work. After The Spoilers in 1942, Barthelmess retired from regular acting. He had invested wisely in real estate, and did not need to endure the humiliating decline Hollywood often demanded from former idols. During the Second World War, he also served in the Naval Reserve. Later generations knew his photographs more readily than his name, even though he had once been among cinema's highest-paid performers. His disappearance was a lesson in how fame can shrink without a single disastrous moment. The applause became quieter, the offers became smaller, and Barthelmess calmly closed the door before the industry could turn his past glory into a spectacle. His choice preserved dignity, but also made a foundational silent-era performance seem strangely distant from the Hollywood history he had helped create for future audiences. Number 33. Kay Francis. No actress wore expensive gowns with more authority, and few delivered sharp dialogue with such controlled sadness. Kay Francis rose from Broadway to become one of Warner Bros.' biggest stars of the early 1930s. Her films sold glamour during the Depression, while her characters often suffered behind polished doors. But a contract dispute and a series of weak assignments damaged her momentum. The studio reportedly placed her in inferior projects while continuing to pay her, a warning to performers who challenged management. Francis eventually left Warner Bros. And continued working independently, including significant wartime service, entertaining troops and supporting relief efforts. Her film career ended in 1946, and stage appearances continued only until the early 1950s. Then she withdrew almost completely. There was no late television reinvention, no sentimental return to the studio, and little effort to protect her celebrity image. She lived privately and allowed the public to forget how powerful she had once been. For years, her elegant reputation overshadowed her actual talent, as though the clothes had acted by themselves. Rediscovery came slowly through film archives and classic movie television. Frances disappeared partly because the studio system punished her, and partly because she refused to spend old age asking that same system to remember her kindly. That neglect now seems astonishing, because her best work combines star glamour with emotional discipline few contemporaries matched on screen. Number 32. Ruth Chatterton. A commanding voice made Ruth Chatterton seem perfectly designed for talking pictures. Already a celebrated stage actress, she entered Hollywood in middle age and quickly became an Academy Award-nominated star through films such as Madam X and Sarah and Son. Her screen women were sophisticated, wounded, and often far more independent than the men around them expected. Yet Chatterton never treated movies as the only possible life. As roles became less interesting in the late 1930s, she returned to the theater rather than cling to fading studio status. She also pursued aviation with unusual seriousness, becoming an accomplished pilot at a time when few women were encouraged to enter that world. Later, she wrote novels and occasionally appeared on television or stage, but her identity as a Hollywood star had effectively ended. To casual audiences, she seemed to disappear just before the classic studio era reached its most familiar form. In truth, she had moved toward interests that offered more control. Chatterton's exit challenges the idea that performers leave only after failure. She possessed talent, money, and prestige, yet refused to let one profession define the rest of her years. Hollywood lost her because the sky, the page, and the stage all promised freedoms the camera could not. Her story deserves rediscovery as proof that ambition can expand when one famous career closes and an entirely different life begins. Number 31. Colleen Moore. The bobbed hair, short skirts, and mischievous smile made Colleen Moore one of the defining faces of the 1920s. Long before the word influencer existed, young women copied her style, and studios paid heavily for the energy she brought to films such as Flaming Youth and Ella Cinders. Moore was not merely a carefree flapper, however. She watched her finances closely and understood that silent stardom might not last forever. After sound altered the industry, she attempted a comeback, but retired from acting in 1934. What looked like disappearance became a second life, built on careful investments, financial writing, and philanthropy. Her elaborate fairy castle, created with miniature treasures and remarkable craftsmanship, eventually became a famous museum attraction that raised money for children's charities. That achievement survived even as many of her films were lost or became difficult to see. Hollywood publicity had presented Moore as playful youth made permanent, but she aged into a disciplined businesswoman who needed no studio approval. Her retreat also demonstrates how film loss can erase a star twice. First when the person leaves, and again when the work itself vanishes. Moore escaped the industry successfully, yet history took decades to recover the scale of the celebrity she had left behind. The fairy castle ultimately attracted more visitors than many preserved silent films, becoming a miniature monument to the imagination Hollywood once advertised through her performances. Number 30. Corinne Griffith. At one point, Corinne Griffith was called the Orchid Lady of the Screen, a title that captured both her beauty and the delicate prestige surrounding her. She became one of silent cinema's best-paid actresses and earned an Academy Award nomination after sound arrived. Then, during the early 1930s, her acting career came to an end. Griffith did not fade into poverty or spend years chasing nostalgic attention. She turned her intelligence toward real estate, investments, and writing, reportedly building a fortune that made movie salaries seem less important. Books, business interests, and public controversies occasionally returned her name to newspapers, but the screen star had disappeared. The strangest chapter came much later during a legal proceeding, when questions about her identity and age produced sensational headlines. Those stories sometimes overwhelmed discussion of her work, reducing a major performer to an eccentric footnote. Yet her disappearance had begun from a position of unusual strength. Griffith understood money, retained control of her image, and left before Hollywood could place her permanently in mother roles or minor supporting parts. The industry expected actresses to fear invisibility. She treated invisibility as freedom. By the time younger audiences encountered her films, the Orchid Lady had become a mystery. Wealthy, private, and almost impossible to fit inside Hollywood's preferred story of rise, fall, and regret. Her fortune complicated Hollywood's preferred tragedy, so popular memory made her eccentric instead for decades. Number 29. Dolores Costello. A famous surname eventually overshadowed the woman who had carried it onto the screen with remarkable grace. Dolores Costello came from an acting family and became one of Warner Brothers' most admired silent stars, often promoted as a screen goddess. Her marriage to John Barrymore linked two theatrical dynasties and later made her the grandmother of Drew Barrymore. But Costello's own career deserved more than a place in somebody else's family tree. The arrival of sound, motherhood, and the pressures of an unstable marriage gradually pulled her away from regular production. She returned for several character roles, including appearances in Little Lord Fauntleroy and The Magnificent Ambersons, yet these were echoes of a career that had once placed her at the center of romantic spectacle. After This Is the Army in 1943, she retired permanently. Costello spent her remaining decades largely outside public performance, emerging occasionally as classic Hollywood rediscovered its silent past. Her exit had none of Garbo's carefully guarded mythology, so it received less attention. That quietness made the disappearance deeper. A woman once photographed as the ideal of screen beauty became known mainly through descendants and old stills. The movies had not entirely rejected her. Life had simply carried her beyond the roles they were willing to offer. Her surviving performances reveal an actress of restraint and intelligence, not merely a beautiful branch of a famous family legacy. Number 28. Marion Davies. For years, gossip insisted that Marion Davies owed everything to newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. That convenient story ignored a harder truth. Audiences genuinely liked her, especially when she was allowed to be funny. Her comic timing in films such as Show People revealed a lively performer trapped beneath the grand productions and serious roles Hearst preferred. When sound arrived, Davies adapted, but changing tastes and the burden of Hearst's influence complicated her position. Her final film appeared in 1937. Afterward, she devoted much of her time to Hearst, caring for him through declining health while managing property and charitable interests of her own. Hollywood's later portrait of her was badly distorted by comparisons to the talentless singer in Citizen Kane, even though that character was not a fair representation of Davies. By the time historians corrected the record, she had been absent from screens for decades. Her disappearance was therefore both physical and reputational. She left acting, and then a fictional shadow replaced the real woman in public memory. Davies possessed business sense, loyalty, generosity, and a gift for comedy, yet Hollywood preferred the simpler scandal. Walking away protected her private life, but it also allowed other people to write the version of her story that survived longest. Modern restorations have helped rescue her comedy, finally allowing the real performer to compete with the gossip-built caricature at last. Number 27. Edna Purviance. Cinema's most famous little tramp rarely walked alone in his early films. Beside him, Edna Purviance supplied warmth, dignity, and emotional balance, becoming Charlie Chaplin's leading lady in more than 30 productions. Her presence helped transform short comedies into stories with genuine feeling, and in The Kid and the Immigrant, she seemed less like a supporting player than the human center of Chaplin's world. Their romantic relationship ended, and Chaplin's creative interests changed. By the late 1920s, Purviance's starring career was effectively over. He continued to keep her on his payroll for years, and she made tiny, uncredited appearances, but the woman audiences had once recognized instantly disappeared into private life. She married, lived comfortably, and avoided attempts to turn her history with Chaplin into endless publicity. Because she had been so closely associated with one filmmaker, her identity became difficult for Hollywood to imagine outside his frame. The industry did not know how to reposition her, and she showed little desire to fight for that reinvention. Purviance's disappearance is especially haunting because her face remains present in images seen around the world. She never vanished from the films. She vanished from the story told about how those films were made. Seen today, her quiet reactions often make Chaplin's emotion believable, confirming that the forgotten partner was essential to the celebrated genius in scene after scene. Number 26. Louise Brooks. No one disappeared from Hollywood with more apparent defiance than Louise Brooks, although the world eventually discovered that the silence concealed a remarkable writer. Her black bob and cool, direct gaze made her unforgettable in Pandora's Box and Diary of a Lost Girl, both created in Europe after American studios failed to understand her. Brooks disliked studio discipline, refused expected compromises, and earned a reputation for being difficult. When she returned to Hollywood, important opportunities had narrowed. She rejected or lost roles, appeared in minor westerns, and quit films in 1938. The years that followed were harsh. She worked ordinary jobs, struggled financially, and became almost unknown to an industry that had once photographed her as modernity itself. Then French critics and film programmers rediscovered her work. Brooks moved to Rochester, New York, studied cinema seriously, and began writing essays of extraordinary clarity about fame, performance, and the people she had known. Collected in Lulu in Hollywood, those pieces transformed her from forgotten actress into one of film history's sharpest witnesses. Her disappearance was not the end of the story. It was the long, painful interval required for the world to recognize that Brooks understood Hollywood better from outside it than most people ever had from within. By choosing honesty over self-protection in her essays, she achieved the lasting authority that studio publicity had never been willing to grant her during stardom. Number 25. Louise Rayner. Winning one Academy Award can define a career. Winning 2 in consecutive years should make a performer untouchable. Louise Rayner accomplished that with The Great Ziegfeld and The Good Earth, becoming the first actor to receive back-to-back Oscars. MGM presented her as proof of its prestige, but the relationship quickly turned sour. Rayner wanted difficult, meaningful work. Studio chief Louis B. Mayer wanted obedience and profitable assignments. She rejected the idea that gratitude required surrendering artistic judgment. After a run of disappointing projects, she left MGM and largely abandoned Hollywood before the 1940s had properly begun. A wartime film, stage work, and rare later appearances showed that she had not lost her ability, but she never returned to the studio star treadmill. For decades, she lived mostly in Europe and seemed almost mythical to American audiences. Hollywood often framed her departure as wasteful or temperamental, as though walking away from an Oscar-winning career were evidence of instability. Rayner saw it differently. Fame had arrived too quickly, control had disappeared, and remaining would have required becoming a product she no longer respected. She survived nearly a century, long enough to watch the industry celebrate the very independence it had once punished. Her disappearance was not defeat. It was a refusal delivered at the moment Hollywood believed she belonged to it. Her long survival became the sharpest answer to predictions that leaving Hollywood meant ruin. Number 24. Jean Arthur. A voice that sounded nervous, witty, and completely original made Jean Arthur one of classic Hollywood's most beloved comic actresses. In Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, The More the Merrier, and Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, she played ordinary women whose intelligence steadily defeated powerful men. Off-camera, however, Arthur found stardom exhausting. She suffered intense stage fright, disliked publicity, and fought studios for better material. After her contract years, she became increasingly selective, disappearing for long periods between projects. Shane, released in 1953, became her final film, even though offers continued. She attempted theater and television, but those returns were brief and often difficult. Later, Arthur taught drama at Vassar and the North Carolina School of the Arts, sharing experience without reopening her private life to celebrity culture. She refused most interviews and avoided the nostalgia circuit that could have made her a permanent public institution. That withdrawal strengthened the mystery around her voice and face. Audiences kept expecting another comeback because her performances felt so alive, yet Arthur had already made her choice. Hollywood comedy depended on her ability to make anxiety charming. The industry rarely asked what it cost her to produce that effect. By leaving, she protected the person behind the trembling, unforgettable sound. Each refusal made the old films feel more precious, preserving the impression that her nervous heroines had stepped away while still undefeated before the public. Number 23. Gene Tierney. Beauty opened the door for Gene Tierney, but it also concealed the seriousness of the battles she faced. Her cool, haunting performance in Laura made her an icon, while Leave Her to Heaven earned an Academy Award nomination and revealed a frightening intensity beneath the elegance. During the 1950s, severe depression and other mental health difficulties disrupted her work. She underwent extensive treatment, including hospital stays, at a time when such experiences were discussed with cruelty rather than understanding. After stepping away, Tierney worked briefly in a department store, where a customer recognized her and the story reached the press. She later returned to the screen in Advise and Consent and several other projects, proving that her talent remained. Yet the comeback was limited, and after the mid-1960s, she left movies behind. Marriage and life in Texas offered distance from the machinery that had once inspected every feature of her face. Tierney eventually wrote openly about her illness, helping replace rumor with her own account. Her disappearance was not a glamorous act of mystery. It was an effort to survive conditions the studio system could neither control nor compassionately accommodate. Hollywood had sold her as an impossible ideal. Walking away allowed her to live as a human being rather than continue performing perfection for strangers. Number 22. Hedy Lamarr. Behind one of Hollywood's most photographed faces worked a mind the publicity departments barely understood. Hedy Lamarr became famous through Algiers, Samson and Delilah, and a screen image built around exotic beauty. Studios repeatedly placed her in decorative roles, even as she spent private hours inventing. During the Second World War, Lamarr and composer George Antheil patented a frequency-hopping communication concept intended to make radio-controlled weapons harder to jam. The idea received little practical recognition at the time, and Hollywood continued treating her intelligence like an amusing secret. Her film career slowed during the 1950s, ending with The Female Animal in 1958. Legal disputes, unhappy publicity, and a growing distrust of public attention followed. Lamarr eventually lived in deep seclusion, communicating largely by telephone and refusing the cameras that had once made her famous. Late recognition for her technical work arrived, but she did not return to receive every honor in person. The disappearance completed a bitter reversal. The industry that had shown her face everywhere had failed to see the person behind it. Lamarr did not simply vanish because roles dried up. She withdrew from a culture that repeatedly reduced a complicated woman to an image. Only after she was safely beyond Hollywood's control did the wider world begin discussing the full scale of what it had overlooked. Number 21. Veronica Lake. One hairstyle can create a star, but it can also become a prison. Veronica Lake's peekaboo wave, with blonde hair falling over one eye, became one of the most copied looks of the 1940s. In Sullivan's Travels, This Gun for Hire, and The Blue Dahlia, she combined cool glamour with a surprisingly dry sense of humor. Yet the image was stronger than the protection surrounding the young woman who wore it. Difficult relationships, studio conflict, financial trouble, and struggles with alcohol contributed to a rapid decline. Paramount released her contract. Leading roles disappeared, and by the 1950s, she was working far from the center of Hollywood. Lake later appeared on stage and made occasional screen returns, but none restored her former position. Reports of her working ordinary jobs produced cruel headlines, as though honest work were more shameful than an industry abandoning someone it had heavily promoted. Her final years were unstable, and she died in 1973 at only 50. Lake's disappearance was not one clean retirement. It was a slow erasure carried out in public. The famous hair remained instantly recognizable, while the woman beneath it became increasingly unsupported. Hollywood had marketed mystery as her greatest quality. When her real life became complicated, that same Hollywood treated her pain as another piece of entertainment. Number 20. Frances Farmer. Few old Hollywood stories have been distorted as aggressively as the life of Frances Farmer. She possessed a striking screen presence and a rebellious intelligence, but she resisted the obedient star role Paramount expected her to play. Farmer preferred serious theater and worked with the Group Theater in New York, creating tension with studio executives who wanted her available for conventional films. Personal crises, arrests, family conflict, and severe mental health problems later led to institutional treatment. Sensational books and movies claimed that she underwent a lobotomy, but responsible biographical research has challenged that famous story. The truth was already painful enough without invention. After leaving institutional care, Farmer worked outside entertainment, then gradually returned through regional television and stage appearances. She eventually hosted an Indianapolis television program, presenting a calm public image far removed from the scandal attached to her name. Yet Hollywood never restored her as a major actress. The myth of the destroyed rebel became more marketable than the complicated person who survived and rebuilt part of her life. Farmer disappeared twice, first from the screen during her crisis, and later beneath stories other people told about her. Her legacy remains a warning about what happens when an industry, a family, and the press all compete to control a woman's identity after she can no longer control the narrative herself. Number 19. Barbara Payton. The publicity photographs promised another glamorous blonde, but Barbara Payton's career became one of Hollywood's bleakest cautionary tales. She arrived in Los Angeles with extraordinary confidence and soon received substantial roles opposite James Cagney, Gary Cooper, and Gregory Peck. Studios saw commercial potential, yet her turbulent personal relationships generated more headlines than her performances. A highly publicized romantic triangle damaged her reputation in an era that judged actresses far more harshly than male stars. Substance problems, unreliable behavior, and the collapse of studio support followed. By the mid-1950s, important film offers had nearly disappeared. Peyton's later life unfolded through poverty, legal trouble, and increasingly exploitative press coverage. She published a memoir, but even that became part of the spectacle surrounding her decline. When she died in 1967 at 39, many obituaries treated the tragedy like the final scene of a morality play. That interpretation was convenient for Hollywood because it placed all responsibility on the fallen star. It ignored the system that had rapidly promoted an unprepared young woman, profited from her beauty, and abandoned her when her life became difficult. Peyton did not retire behind guarded gates. She vanished downward, into a world the studios preferred audiences not to connect with their glittering premieres. Her story remains disturbing, precisely because the disappearance happened in full public view. Number 18. Gail Russell. The camera loved Gail Russell's enormous, expressive eyes, but standing before that camera reportedly filled her with intense fear. Paramount discovered her as a teenager and developed her into a delicate leading lady in films such as The Uninvited and The Night Has a Thousand Eyes. Opposite John Wayne in Angel and the Bad Man, she projected quiet strength that made her seem completely at home on screen. The reality was painfully different. Russell struggled with severe shyness and anxiety, and alcohol became a damaging way of coping with production pressure. Her marriage to actor Guy Madison ended, studio patience disappeared, and arrests generated headlines that further reduced her opportunities. She continued taking roles, including a memorable part in The Unholy Wife and a reunion with Wayne in 7 Men from Now, but the path back to stable stardom never formed. By the end of the 1950s, she was largely absent from major pictures. Russell died in 1961 at only 36. Her disappearance exposes the cruelty inside Hollywood's favorite compliment. The camera loves you. A camera cannot offer protection, treatment, friendship, or rest. It only records. Russell gave it vulnerability of unusual beauty, while the system around her mistook that vulnerability for a resource it could use without limit. A more humane studio might have recognized the anxiety behind the performance and protected her health, instead of waiting for reliability to completely break down. Number 17. John Gilbert. For decades, Hollywood repeated a simple story about John Gilbert. The great silent lover opened his mouth, audiences heard an unsuitable voice, and his career died overnight. The truth is more complicated, and far more revealing. Gilbert's voice was perfectly serviceable. He made successful talking pictures, including Queen Christina with Greta Garbo. What changed was the style of screen romance, the quality of his assignments, and his damaged relationship with MGM chief Louis B. Mayer. Gilbert's intense silent acting suddenly appeared old-fashioned to some viewers, while weak projects encouraged the idea that he had become ridiculous. Heavy drinking and personal disappointment worsened the decline. Within a few years, one of the highest-paid stars in the world was struggling to obtain work worthy of his reputation. He died in 1936, at only 38, leaving behind a legend that blamed technology instead of power. That myth protected the studio system. A wrong voice sounded like bad luck. Executive hostility and deliberate mishandling sounded like punishment. Gilbert did not literally disappear after one line of dialogue. He was gradually pushed from the center, watched his image become a joke, and lost the emotional stability needed to resist. Hollywood later romanticized his fall because tragedy was easier to sell than institutional cruelty. Reconsidering Gilbert therefore changes more than one biography. It exposes how easily an employer's version of failure can become accepted history for several later generations. Number 16. George O'Brien. A square jaw and athletic confidence made George O'Brien one of the silent era's strongest screen heroes. John Ford cast him in The Iron Horse, and F.W. Murnau gave him the emotionally demanding lead in Sunrise, now regarded as one of cinema's great achievements. When sound arrived, O'Brien shifted successfully into westerns, becoming a dependable star for audiences who wanted action and moral certainty. Then real history interrupted the manufactured frontier. During the Second World War, he returned to naval service and spent years away from Hollywood. By the time he came back, the industry had changed and younger Western heroes occupied the space he once commanded. O'Brien accepted occasional roles, including memorable appearances for John Ford, but he never attempted to rebuild the relentless starring schedule of his earlier career. Ranching, family, and public service became more important than studio visibility. His final film appearance came in the 1960s, after long gaps that made him seem already retired. O'Brien's disappearance was therefore not a collapse but a redirection of courage. The actor who had played heroic men chose actual service when it mattered, then discovered that Hollywood rarely holds a leading position open. He left behind images of permanent strength, while quietly accepting that his own life had moved beyond the frame. His later cameos felt less like comebacks than respectful farewells from directors who remembered the scale of his earlier importance. Number 15. Harold Lloyd. At his peak, Harold Lloyd was as famous as Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, yet later generations often spoke of him as the comedian who disappeared. The round glasses, straw hat, and eager smile created an ordinary-looking hero forever racing through modern life. In Safety Last, he hung from a clock above a city street, producing one of the most recognizable images in movie history. Lloyd also possessed unusual business sense. He controlled much of his work, earned enormous wealth, and understood that films could be valuable long after their first release. When his style fell out of fashion, he slowed production rather than surrender control. The Sin of Harold Diddlebach, filmed in the 1940s, became his final feature as a star. Afterward, he concentrated on photography, philanthropy, hobbies, and the preservation of his estate. For years, he kept many films out of general circulation because he wanted them shown properly and compensated fairly. That decision protected the negatives, but weakened his place in popular memory while Chaplin and Keaton were rediscovered. Lloyd had not been erased by failure. He had partly hidden himself through ownership. Only later reissues revealed how inventive, athletic, and emotionally precise his comedy had been. His disappearance demonstrates a strange rule of fame. Sometimes controlling your image too carefully can make the world forget it. Number 14. Kim Novak. Nothing about Kim Novak's arrival suggested she would one day reject Hollywood so completely. Columbia Pictures shaped her into a platinum blonde answer to Marilyn Monroe, changing her name, appearance, and public image. Yet Novak's performances repeatedly escaped that packaging. In Picnic, Belle, Book and Candle, and especially Vertigo, she conveyed loneliness and resistance beneath the glamour. The studio wanted a product. The actress wanted control. As the 1960s progressed, Novak became increasingly dissatisfied with the roles and the pressure surrounding celebrity. She moved away from Los Angeles, found peace with animals and painting, and accepted screen work only occasionally. Her final film appeared in 1991, after which she retired from acting. For decades, public sightings were rare, and tabloid reactions to her appearance showed exactly why privacy mattered. Novak continued creating visual art and later spoke more openly about the emotional cost of studio manipulation. Recent honors have brought her back before audiences, but not as someone seeking a conventional comeback. She returns on her own terms, then leaves again. That distinction matters. Novak did not disappear because Vertigo had trapped her in the past. She disappeared because Hollywood had tried to rewrite her while she was still living. The Quiet Life became a way to recover the identity that publicity departments had treated as studio property. Number 13. Doris Day. For 20 years, Doris Day represented an almost impossible form of American brightness. She could sing with effortless warmth, handle physical comedy, and carry romantic films opposite stars such as Rock Hudson, James Garner, and Cary Grant. Behind the cheerful image, her private life included difficult marriages, financial betrayal, and professional decisions often made by others. When her third husband, Martin Melcher, died, Day discovered that money she believed secure had largely disappeared and that she had been committed to a television series. She honored the obligation, turning the Doris Day Show into a success, but the experience deepened her exhaustion with the business. Her final feature film arrived in 1968, and the regular television series ended in 1973. Day then moved to Carmel, California, and devoted herself to animal welfare. She briefly returned for a pet-focused television program in the 1980s, but resisted the award shows, reunion projects, and nostalgic appearances Hollywood repeatedly offered. The disappearance strengthened the false idea that she had been exactly like her sunny characters and could not face a changing culture. In reality, she had worked from adolescence, survived relentless pressure, and finally used her fame to protect animals rather than promote herself. Hollywood wanted another entrance. Day preferred a gate, a quiet home, and lives that needed saving more than her image needed reviving. Number 12. Norma Shearer. MGM once called Norma Shearer its first lady, and for good reason. She moved from silent ingenue to sophisticated sound star, earned an Academy Award for The Divorcee, and played women whose desires challenged the moral limits of early 1930s cinema. Her marriage to production chief Irving Thalberg gave her access to excellent material, but it also encouraged critics to claim that influence, not talent, explained her success. After Thalberg died in 1936, Shearer continued working, though the studio world around her had changed. She turned down roles that later became famous, including parts in Gone with the Wind and Mrs. Miniver, while several final films received mixed responses. In 1942, after her cardboard lover, she retired at 40. She later married ski instructor Martin Arouget and maintained a guarded private life, appearing at Hollywood functions only selectively. The industry kept predicting a comeback, but Shearer never made another movie. Her withdrawal was especially striking because MGM had built her as a permanent symbol of prestige. Once she stepped away, the studio's official history gradually favored other legends, and many of her films became difficult to see. Shearer disappeared through choice, widowhood, and changing fashion. But the silence also revealed how quickly even a first lady could be removed from Hollywood's family album when she stopped serving the brand. Number 11. Shirley Temple. Before most children learn multiplication, Shirley Temple was carrying an entire studio's finances on her curls. During the Depression, films such as Bright Eyes, Curly Top, and The Little Colonel made her the most popular movie star in America. Her songs and optimism offered comfort, while Fox built a global business around the image of perfect childhood. But childhood is the one role no performer can keep. As Temple grew older, audiences resisted the transition, and increasingly conventional teenage parts failed to recreate the phenomenon. She retired from films in 1950 at only 22. A television anthology later brought her briefly back to entertainment, yet she never attempted to reclaim movie stardom. Instead, Temple entered Republican politics, served as a United States representative to the United Nations, became ambassador to Ghana and Czechoslovakia, and held important diplomatic posts. That second career was so substantial that calling her merely a former child star misses the point. Hollywood had treated maturity as the end of her value. Public service gave maturity a purpose. Her disappearance from movies also protected her from the sad nostalgia often imposed on former child performers. Temple did not spend adulthood repeating, "On the good ship Lollipop." She entered rooms where charm alone was insufficient, and proved that the disciplined professional behind the famous smile had survived the machinery built around the little girl. Number 10. Cary Grant. The final close-up of Walk, Don't Run did not look like the ending of a legendary career. Cary Grant was still handsome, still popular, and still capable of carrying sophisticated comedy. Yet after that 1966 film, he retired permanently. The immediate reason was deeply personal. He wanted to be present for his daughter Jennifer, born that year, instead of repeating the emotional distance that had marked his own childhood. Grant had spent decades constructing one of cinema's most polished identities, blending working-class Bristol origins with an invented name, perfect tailoring, and seemingly effortless confidence. He understood the labor behind the illusion. Rather than let aging studios dismantle it through weak roles, he ended the performance himself. Grant joined corporate boards, pursued business interests, and later toured theaters with A Conversation with Cary Grant, answering audience questions without returning to acting. Directors continued offering projects, and fans expected one last romantic comedy, but he refused. His disappearance became part of the elegance. Unlike stars who declared retirement and returned when attention faded, Grant protected the ending. He had played men who always knew when to leave a room, and his greatest act of control may have been recognizing when the entire industry had become that room. Hollywood did not lose him by accident. He walked out while everyone was still asking him to stay. Number 9. Dolores Hart. One morning in 1963, a successful young actress left Hollywood for what friends believed would be a spiritual visit. She did not return. Dolores Hart had acted opposite Elvis Presley in Loving You and King Creole, shared the screen with Montgomery Clift in Wild as the Wind, and seemed positioned for a long career. She was 24, engaged to architect Don Robinson, and receiving major opportunities. Yet the glamour felt increasingly disconnected from a religious calling she had been exploring. Hart entered the Abbey of Regina Laudis in Connecticut, a Benedictine community, and eventually took solemn vows. The choice shocked the press, which reduced it to a sensational contrast between movie kisses and monastery walls. Reality was more thoughtful. She did not claim that acting was corrupt or meaningless. She believed another form of service demanded her full life. Robinson never married and remained a loyal friend until his death. Hart later became prioress, helped guide the abbey, and maintained a limited connection to cinema through Academy membership and a documentary about her journey. Her disappearance remains powerful because it rejected the central promise of Hollywood, that being watched is the highest form of existence. Hart had already experienced fame and understood its rewards. She walked away because a quieter audience and a deeper obligation mattered more. The studios could offer immortality on film. She chose faith, lived in ordinary time. Number 8. Grace Kelly. A fairy tale wedding gave Hollywood one of its most beautiful endings, but it also closed a career that had barely reached full power. Grace Kelly moved from television and stage work to major films with astonishing speed. High Noon established her presence, Mogambo earned an Academy Award nomination, and The Country Girl brought her the Oscar. Alfred Hitchcock then used her cool elegance brilliantly in Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief. In 1956, Kelly married Prince Rainier of Monaco and became Princess Grace. Royal expectations made continued acting nearly impossible, and she never appeared in another completed feature. Hitchcock later tried to bring her back for Marnie, but public and political objections in Monaco ended the plan. Kelly devoted herself to family, cultural programs, and charitable work, while the frozen image of the actress grew more glamorous each year. The disappearance protected her filmography from decline, but also created unanswered questions. Could she have become a great middle-aged character actress? Would Hitchcock have found new contradictions beneath the perfect surface? Hollywood turned the royal marriage into a dream, because dreams do not require discussions about sacrifice. Kelly gained a principality and lost the profession she had mastered. Her exit looked like ultimate success, yet it remains one of cinema's most elegant forms of unfinished business. That unanswered possibility keeps her departure bittersweet, suspended between genuine royal duty and an artistic future audiences never received on screen. Number 7. Mary Pickford. Long before Hollywood had a sign, Mary Pickford understood how to control an audience. Her curls and expressive face made her America's sweetheart, but the innocent image concealed a formidable producer and business strategist. Pickford helped create United Artists, with Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, giving major talent a way to distribute films outside traditional studio control. She won the Academy Award for Coquette after sound arrived, yet the new era weakened the childlike screen identity audiences associated with her. After Secrets in 1933, she retired from acting. Producing, charitable work, and industry affairs continued, but the star herself withdrew increasingly into Pickfair, the mansion once famous for glamorous gatherings. Alcohol problems, grief, and discomfort with aging contributed to a more secluded final period. Visitors were limited, and the woman once recognized across the world became a distant voice behind closed doors. Her disappearance carried special irony. Pickford had helped build Hollywood, shaped star power, and fought for creative independence. Yet the industry's memory reduced her to curls and childhood. She had outlived the visual identity that made her powerful. Rather than let cameras document that change, she controlled access until the end. Hollywood's first great female mogul did not vanish because she lacked authority. She vanished because she understood exactly how ruthlessly the screen preserves youth and punishes anyone who survives it. Number 6. Clara Bow. No silent-era image captured modern rebellion more completely than Clara Bow laughing at rules she seemed born to break. The film It made her the original It girl, but her appeal had already been obvious. Speed, humor, emotional honesty, and a refusal to behave like a distant society beauty. Bow became Paramount's biggest attraction, while gossip magazines examined her private life with extraordinary cruelty. Lawsuits, fabricated stories, overwork, and the pressure of supporting relatives intensified her anxiety. Sound was not the simple disaster later myths suggested. Her Brooklyn accent did not automatically end her career, and several talking films succeeded. The deeper problem was exhaustion. After marrying actor Rex Bell, Bow moved toward ranch life in Nevada and made her final film Hoopla in 1933. She was only 28. Attempts at a quieter existence did not erase the emotional damage left by fame, and later years included serious mental health struggles. Bao rarely returned to the public events that might have restored her place in film history. Hollywood had marketed her as limitless energy, then treated her breakdown as proof that the product had failed. Her disappearance was an act of retreat from a culture that had demanded access to every romance, rumor, and nervous wound. The It Girl survived the decade, but she refused to keep performing It for people who had never asked what the performance cost. Number 5. Deanna Durbin. Universal Pictures was struggling when a Canadian teenager with a clear soprano voice became its unlikely rescue. Deanna Durbin's musicals, beginning with Three Smart Girls, drew huge audiences and helped stabilize the studio during the late 1930s. She appeared cheerful, wholesome, and effortless, but the schedule was demanding and the roles increasingly repetitive. As Durbin grew older, executives continued trying to preserve the adolescent image that had made money. She wanted greater control and more challenging work. Contract conflict followed, and after For the Love of Mary in 1948, Universal released her. Instead of searching for another studio, Durbin retired at 27. She married French director Charles David, moved to France, and guarded her privacy with extraordinary determination. Comeback offers arrived for decades, some involving major salaries, but she rejected them. Aside from one substantial interview in 1983, she rarely explained herself publicly. That silence encouraged rumors of bitterness, illness, or regret. Friends and family described something simpler. She preferred her marriage, children, and ordinary routines to celebrity. Durbin's disappearance was especially shocking because the studio had once depended on her visibility. She had saved a Hollywood company, then discovered that Hollywood could not offer the life she wanted. By refusing every return, she transformed retirement from an interruption into a permanent declaration of independence. The voice remained on film. The woman belonged to herself. Number 4. Bobby Driscoll. A child with enormous emotional range gave Disney some of its most memorable early live-action performances, but the studio's magic did not protect him when childhood ended. Bobby Driscoll appeared in Song of the South, won a special Juvenile Academy Award, and became the voice and model for Peter Pan. He could project mischief, loneliness, and sincerity with unusual precision. Then adolescence changed his face, acne affected the polished image Disney wanted, and his contract was terminated. The rejection was devastating. Roles became scarce, substance dependence and legal problems followed, and Driscoll drifted from the industry that had defined his identity. In New York, he became associated with the artistic circle around Andy Warhol's factory and produced visual art, but stability remained elusive. In 1968, 2 children found his body in an abandoned building. With no identification, he was buried in an unmarked grave on Hart Island. His family learned what had happened only after searching for him. The boy who had voiced Peter Pan, the child who never grew up, had died almost completely unknown. Hollywood later celebrated the films without confronting the abandonment behind them. Driscoll's disappearance remains one of the industry's most painful examples of conditional affection. As long as he fit the fantasy, he was valuable. Once age and difficulty complicated the image, the gates closed. His final anonymity was the darkest conclusion to a system that knew how to create child stars, but not how to support the adults they became. Number 3. Sean Flynn. This is the only name near the top whose disappearance was not a metaphor. Sean Flynn, the son of adventure star Errol Flynn, began acting in films such as The Son of Captain Blood. His surname opened doors, but it also placed him inside a comparison he did not want to spend his life performing. Flynn left conventional stardom and became a photojournalist, covering conflict in Vietnam and other dangerous regions with a fearlessness that sometimes worried colleagues. On April 6, 1970, Flynn and fellow photographer Dana Stone traveled by motorcycle into Cambodia while reporting on the expanding war. They were stopped at a checkpoint and never seen again. Investigations, witness accounts, and searches produced theories but no confirmed final answer. Flynn was declared legally dead in 1984. The mystery froze him between 2 identities: Hollywood's adventurous son and a real-world witness who entered danger without a script. Over the years, rumored remains have been examined, and claims have surfaced, yet certainty remains absent. That unresolved ending gives his story a weight no publicity department could have invented. Errol Flynn had played men who crossed hostile territory and returned for the final scene. Sean rejected imitation, pursued reality, and disappeared beyond the reach of cameras. His absence is not merely a lost career. It is an unfinished historical question attached to one of cinema's most famous names. Number 2. Marlene Dietrich. By the time Marlene Dietrich withdrew behind the doors of her Paris apartment, she had already lived several public lives. In The Blue Angel, she became an international sensation. In Hollywood, films such as Morocco and Shanghai Express turned her into an image of controlled desire, dressed as convincingly in a tuxedo as in a glittering gown. During the Second World War, she rejected Nazi approaches, became an American citizen, entertained Allied troops near the front, and later received honors for that service. When major film roles slowed, Dietrich reinvented herself as a concert performer, using lighting, costume, and carefully staged entrances to transform aging into theater. A fall during a 1975 performance in Sydney helped end that chapter. She made a brief final film appearance in Just a Gigolo, then retreated almost completely. For roughly the last decade of her life, she remained in bed much of the time, spoke to friends and officials by telephone, and allowed few visitors. Her voice continued traveling while her body stayed hidden. Dietrich had spent a career mastering what the world could see, so seclusion became her final form of direction. It was not simple vanity. Pain, frailty, and dependence threatened the self-created image she had defended for decades. Rather than let photographers capture a version she had not designed, she disappeared. The woman who had made entrances into an art turned her last exit into an even more powerful performance. Number 1. Greta Garbo. No Hollywood disappearance has created a larger legend than Greta Garbo's. She entered American movies as a Swedish discovery, and soon became the face of silent mystery, then survived sound with the famous campaign, Garbo Talks. Anna Christie, Grand Hotel, Queen Christina, Anna Karenina, and Camille revealed far more than beauty. They showed an actress capable of making stillness feel like thought. Yet the machinery surrounding stardom exhausted her. After the comedy Two-Faced Woman received a mixed response in 1941, Garbo stopped making films at 36. The pause became permanent. Producers proposed comebacks, photographers hunted her, and reporters treated every walk through Manhattan as evidence in a mystery. Garbo refused all of it. She collected art, traveled, maintained friendships, invested wisely, and lived in a New York apartment without becoming the tragic hermit popular mythology demanded. Privacy was not emptiness. It was the life she had chosen once she no longer wished to perform for millions. The famous line, "I want to be alone," was also simplified. Garbo later distinguished between wanting to be left alone and wanting loneliness. Hollywood could not accept that difference because celebrity depends on the belief that attention is irresistible. Her disappearance became the ultimate rejection of that belief. She left while young, never returned, and allowed absence to grow more famous than most careers. Every reclusive star since has been compared with Garbo, but none has made withdrawal feel so complete, deliberate, and permanently cinematic. Hollywood loves a grand entrance, but these stories prove that an exit can be even more revealing. Some stars protected their peace, some were punished for resisting the system. Others were swallowed by illness, changing tastes, or mysteries that never fully ended. Yet every face on this list left something behind. Which disappearance surprised you most? Share your answer below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and return again for more forgotten stories from cinema's most fascinating age ever.